Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back. Just want to say a special welcome to Erin Johnston and Terri MacAdam, who are here to talk to us today about harassment policies and sexual violence policies at the public schools branch. And welcome to Robert Mitchell, who is a new member of our committee. He's replacing Sunny Gallant as of now. So back on, welcome. And can I get a mover to move the agenda? Heath. And shall it carry?
Carry.
And so without further ado, I think we'll kind of do in the tradition of just kind of holding our questions until you're finished, and then we can jump in. And just a reminder to go through me for questions. Right, are we great? Well, great.
So just for clarification, we won't be speaking on the harassment policy. That would be an HR presentation, but we did bring in some of our policies that will cover this. So the public schools branch, as some of you would know, is made up of 56 schools, approximately 19,000 students and 3,000 staff. We do provide quality education to students across the entire province. Each day, thousands of interactions take place between students and staff, and overwhelmingly, these are positive, trusting interactions. So I know the question was brought to us, what policies do we have in place to protect students and staff in our buildings? So the Safe and Caring Learning Environments policy and procedure would be the main one that I'd like to speak to today, because it is an overarching policy. It's sort of the umbrella policy that we say to schools, this is what you should build your school on. This is where you'll build your school climate. This is the important procedures that you'll follow. So the policy itself went through extensive public consultation, which included the district advisory councils, all of our union partners that we work with, principals, school staff, board-based staff. We had legal consultation, home and school, and then the public had an opportunity to put input into this policy. There were policies in place in the past that were interim policies, but this was an extensive revision that was done in 2018. Recently, it was shared and discussed with principals, with QP 3260, with all of our bus drivers, with student services staff, and to Colonel Gray parents upon request. Principals were then tasked with sharing and discussing this policy with staff and students. And the policy does specifically outline sexual misconduct, and the areas that it does outline are student to student, student to staff, and staff to student. It also takes in a lot of other areas, and there's copies of this for you available afterwards. So it would take in the bullying, the discrimination, threat, abuse, vandalism, violence. But I know that we were asked to speak specifically to sexual misconduct. And the first thing that I'd want to say is any allegation that comes forward of sexual misconduct or abuse is taken seriously and receives immediate action. So the purpose of the policy itself was to establish the expectation for creating and maintaining a safe, caring, respectful, and inclusive environment for all students and all staff. And it was also to promote a shared responsibility among members of the school community. So it takes into consideration all of the members of that school community, staff, students, parents, guardians, and volunteers. And in the policy, it's in the procedures themselves, they quote the Education Act, and they talk about the role of each of those members within a school community. So the documents and the supplementary incident response guide, which is available to you, outline the steps of who would you contact and how would I contact them in the case of sexual misconduct. And I also left copies of the policy for you if you'd like to have them. So once an allegation is brought forward, it can result in police involvement, child and family, obviously, involvement, a PSB investigation, and school-based disciplinary action, including suspension. If it is a sexual allegation, then the first call would go to child and family. If the police become involved, then our investigation is sometimes halted while the police do their investigation, and then ours starts. And then some appropriate support is provided to the student through student services. Our health curriculum also has been updated to engage students in conversations about healthy relationships and how to understand consent. So it's been revised to reflect societal changes and where we are in 2020. The new health curriculum is presently being piloted at 6 intermediate schools and 6 elementary schools in grades 1 to 3. And the curriculum outcomes support current societal discussions in the classroom. So for example, the grade 9 resource was created to help teachers engage youth in important sexual health discussions regarding consent, gender norms, bystander intervention, and sexual assault. And a good example of one of the resources being used is the Microphone Project. And you can Google it if you're not familiar with it, but there is a song there by Kinley Dowling that was written after a sexual assault after her prom, and it's pretty moving. So who supports students and staff once an allegation is made? And that would be primarily the administration, of course, often gets this first. Like a principal will often get that first, but the primary people that go in and support all of that would be the PSB directors, and the call would come to myself at Student Services, and then I would call HR. So those two directors would immediately be involved, and the director and the assistant director, who's Erin, would be informed. Then we have managers at the PSB on both HR and Student Services who would be involved with supporting staff and students. We have senior department staff who would be our administrator support leaders who often help administrators through difficult situations. The consultants, which would be the counseling consultants, and the psychologists who would go in to support students and their families. And then the student well-being teams, of course, are now also a part of that team. And we would often refer people, so if an allegation was brought against you, to EAP as well for support. So we've done a lot of training on this in recent years because policy is what's written on a piece of paper, but training is paramount to people understanding it and using it and engaging in it and making it a part of their school environment. So principals and support staff have received training on the safe and caring learning environment. So our support staff would include youth service workers, EAs, all of our bus drivers have been trained, student services staff have been trained. So all of the people who are in close contact with students every day were given the initial training. So it would be well over 400, 500 people that would have received that initial training. It was very hands-on type of training. It was not just reading the words, it was actually breaking down the procedures in the document and making them live. How could you incorporate this into your school? How can you engage the people in your school to have a healthy and safe learning environment? Principals were provided with a package that was titled Steps in Dealing with a Staff Allegation. There was a presentation that went with that. I believe I've tabled a document that was used for that presentation so that if an allegation does come forward to a principal, it tells them all the steps to follow, who to contact, when to contact them, and what the responsibilities are. And then included in that package was also an information sheet for employees in the event that they were involved in an allegation. So what it means, what will happen, who should you contact, for example, EAP, the fact that they could be sent home on an administrative leave. We've recently done scenario-based training with principals and vice principals on allegations and situations that they might face. So we brought in the Education Act and all of the relevant policies and documents and gave them scenarios so that they could actually do the work and sit and go through all of the steps and all of their responsibilities and what's outlined in the Education Act and the policies for them to follow, and then gave feedback on those situations. And that's something that we're going to be doing ongoing because it was very well received. We had legal counsel from McGinnis Cooper in 2019 provide training to the PSB leadership team and to principals on good documentation practices, what to document, how to retain that documentation. And in our principal evaluations, which are ongoing, so many principals are evaluated per year, one of the questions that they are being asked is, how are you engaging staff and students in the safe and caring learning environment policy and procedure? So again, to keep that a live document that exists within the framework of the school. All the principals and vice principals were provided training in December on fierce conversations, which is something that our administrators face every day, is how do I engage in those difficult conversations? How do I properly approach it and draw people into the conversation? And then all of our new to the role principals, because I think we had over 30 changes in school administrations this year, were provided training this year that included the Safe and Caring Learning Environments policy and procedure, as well as the importance of good documentation practices. Our student record guidelines are under revision to support record management and documentation practices in schools, and all schools have been tasked to update or create a code of conduct that reflects the Safe and Caring Learning Environments procedure and the concerns and resolutions procedure. And finally, going forward, what are our plans? So we want to create parent and student-friendly versions of the Safe and Caring Learning Environments. We are looking at doing infographics, posters, pamphlets, things that students would see throughout their school day, you know, whether it's on the bathroom wall or the cafeteria wall or a brochure that can be handed to them so that they really understand the policy and the procedures. We've created some social media sites where we'd like to link the policies. They aren't linked there yet, but that is the plan going forward. And the Kids Helpline would also be something that we'd like to promote on our own media pages. School websites and school-based social media to link the policies to their websites. That would be one thing that we would have received some feedback on, is that sometimes people find our website difficult. It is under revision. But to find the policy, sometimes you need to know the name of the policy when you don't know what you're looking for. So to make it more parent-friendly, kid-friendly, and have it available in those places. There is an ongoing expectation for principals to share new policies and regularly revisit existing policies and staff. But again, with this being the overarching policy, it's the most important one from the student services perspective. And for principals to share and discuss policies with the home and school groups. Presentations will be made available to present this policy to district advisory councils. And the last plan is to work with schools to develop school codes of conduct with input from students and families. Because I think if students and family have that input, they'll be more engaged in the policy themselves. So that's it for our presentation, and now we're open to questions.
James?
Thanks. I guess my first question, just on one of your first slides, where you had student to student, student to staff, staff to student. Is there any particular reason why you didn't include staff to staff?
Yeah, that's a different policy.
Okay.
It's an HR policy, and it would be their harassment, and I'm not even sure the whole name of it, but it is a different policy. It does stand outside of this one.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Robert?
Thank you, Chair. You kind of addressed this for me on the last slide to a certain degree, but my question was about involving the parents. So you said you were going to establish some new clear language kind of education piece. Is that something that has been done in the past as well, to include the parents in what the school system, how they're handling this, how they're treating this, what they're doing? Is that something that's been frequently discussed with parents in the past?
I don't know that any of the policies have ever been turned into an infographic or pamphlet kind of thing. I think that would be new thinking. The policy is there, and you kind of want to say you should read it, but in reality, I think it needs to be made more friendly and take some of the policy language out of it. So I don't know that that's been done in the past, to be honest with you. But I think it's really important that families are involved in the going forward.
And the social media piece, I like that. I think that will expand who you reach out to, even if it's new parents, younger, that the kids are not in the school system, perhaps. That would be something that they can familiarize themselves with even prior to that happening. I just have one other question, and it's regarding a student who experiences some kind of, a sexual event. When they come to you, what often is decided as their basic need, like their initial need? What often is that? Is that some kind of counseling, or how do you interact with that?
Absolutely, you'd want to offer some kind of counseling to the student, because no matter what the student feels, and that's what you have to address. Whether the allegation comes out founded, unfounded, anything else, they still feel. So you want to address that. And there would be counseling consultants, there would be student well-being team, and then there'd be their school counselors. Really important for each student to know that they need to find a trusted person within the building to speak to.
So again, like that will involve the family, the parents will be will know even if the student did not inform them, or am I going out on a different limb here with that?
It's going to depend on the age of the student, and it's going to depend on the seriousness of what the student's experienced. So sometimes a student might come and say, there's nothing that I'm bringing forward, I'm just uncomfortable. Can I see a school counselor? You can still follow up with the student, take their statement, find out what they're feeling, and maybe it is more than just feeling uncomfortable. But there would be situations where students would be seeing a school counselor where their parents may not know that they're seeing a school counselor.
So there is some sense of confidentiality there if there needs to be. Okay, thank you. That's it for me for now.
Michelle?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation. So can you just walk me through what the scope changes of the policy were from in the policy in 2018? Like, what are the main changes?
I don't know if I'm the right person to answer that. I would have been working at the school board at the time, but not in this particular role. I know that there were two policies, and one was a Western policy and one was an Eastern policy, and we don't like to go back to Eastern and Western, but that's what they were. And then they both one of them became an interim policy. So the former Western policy was a far-reaching policy that took in a lot more than this one did. Some of that has been broken down into other policies now. This policy really wanted to get at what's the incident, who's involved, who do I talk to, and what kind of supports can I get? So I think that would be the major change, was to just try and bring it down to a scope of a policy that really tells a child or a parent, if this is the incident, if it's verbal abuse, here's what I follow, and here are the people that are going to help me.
Okay, Michelle, thank you. I think you might have covered this, but what was the consultation process for the policy update? So were students engaged?
Students had an opportunity to be engaged in that. It was put out to schools, it was put out on the website. There was some media around the fact that we were taking consultation on the policy, but formally it went to the district advisory councils. It went to all of our unions. It was given to principals. It was given to school staff. It was given to all our board-based staff, our legal counsel, the home and school, which we would hope would have some of the voice of the student in the home and school. And then it went out for public consultation, which is another place where students could have some input into it.
And
Michelle?
do you know approximately how many people actually contributed or gave input into the?
I wouldn't know the numbers, Michelle, but I would know that from all of those areas, there was input. I just wouldn't know the numbers.
Okay.
Michelle?
And members of the Advisory Council for the Status of Women and the Women's Network, they called on government to review. At one point, they didn't receive a response from that. Do you know if they were engaged, or did the department make the efforts to engage those two groups?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
Michelle?
The policy doesn't have a clause about frequency of review, which it should. So how frequently does the Public Schools Branch expect to update this policy or to review the policy?
I think we review all of our policies on a regular basis. I don't know if we attach a particular timeline to it, but they are being reviewed constantly, and as input comes in from various partners and stakeholders, we take that into account as well. And when and if we decide, or as a collective it's decided that we need to open one to do a formal review, we do that. So it's happening regularly and ongoing. This one and all.
Okay, so you referred to an Eastern and a Western policy, so we haven't had an Eastern and Western board in
No,
quite
formerly
some
there was
time.
an Eastern and Western policy. Yes.
Sorry?
Formerly, there was an Eastern policy and a Western policy, and when we became one board, one of them became the interim policy while this one was being written.
Okay. All right, I'm good for right now, and then I'll come back to me.
Ernie?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your presentation. One of the first slides of sharing of the policy, I believe it indicated that it was shared with parents of Colonel Gray students.
Yes.
Just wondering if it was shared directly with parents in other high schools or in other schools across the province, and if it wasn't shared directly, why it was just Colonel Gray parents?
I was contacted by the Colonel Gray School and Family of Schools back in November and asked to sit on a panel. And could I bring forward any information? And that's what I chose to sit and speak on, was because I really believe in this policy and wanted to get it out there. So certainly available to any family of schools that would like that presentation, and probably something I should be reaching out to them to offer. But that's the reason it was the Colonel Gray. They were having a panel, they were talking about a lot of different issues, and that was the topic that I chose to speak on.
Ernie?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just as a suggestion, I guess, to put it out to the administration and the various schools as a strong suggestion to share this with parents in whatever manner that they would feel was most appropriate. When you mentioned staff and the policy covering off staff, just wondering who all is considered staff, certainly administration, teachers, EAs, wondering like bus drivers, custodians, if they're covered and considered as staff as well?
Yes, they are.
Okay. What about thank you, Chair. What about volunteers?
Yes, I think it mentions volunteers specifically
Oh,
in the
okay.
policy as well.
Yeah. Last question,
Yes,
Chair. You had mentioned, like, if there is an allegation that it would be reported potentially to RCMP, to Child and Family Services. Who makes that determination as to who it actually is reported to?
So if it's of a sexual nature, it immediately is reported to Child and Family, to the Director of Child and Family Services, and that's under the Act, which I brought with me. So we would immediately make that call if it's an allegation of a sexual nature. If it's more of a physical nature, if a student makes that allegation, there would be an investigation where we would go in and the student would either document or speak to what they felt happened, and then there'd be a decision whether or not it would go forward as a police investigation or not. Just lost my thought for a second, sorry.
I guess with that, like under the Child Protection Act, it's mandatory for any individual, it doesn't matter whether they're a teacher or whether they're in the general public, if there is concern with any type of abuse, whether it's physical, emotional, sexual. So with that, even if an allegation was deemed to be of the nature that it would be reported to the RCMP, would it not also be reported to Child and Family?
So we report to Child and Family if it's of a sexual nature. We also report to Child and Family if it's at the hands of the parents. If it's with the knowledge of a parent for neglect or for allowing something to happen to their child. But if it's outside the hands of the parent, and happened at the hands of someone else, we report to the police, and then the police make the call on whether or not to report to Child and Family.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair.
Heath?
Yeah, just like a lot of the information here in the policies, at what level is the preventive education component come in? Like what grade does that happen?
So in the new curriculum that's being used right now, it's starting at the grade 1 level. Just talking about consent and and at a child appropriate level as it builds up, but the new health curriculum is starting at the grade 1 level. And I believe is being piloted at the grade 1 level, right? Yeah, grades 1, 2, and 3, it's being piloted. Heath?
And the other aspect of this is like we talk about providing the policies on social media, but is there any tool that's available to your department on monitoring social media of students or something in that regard?
That's another whole issue. and it is a big issue. It's one that we're called in on quite frequently from a student services level. Some of the inappropriate texting or sharing of pictures or comments that are made on social media. It's certainly one we're trying to dig into right now. It's not really covered under this policy, except that it is under the harassment part of the policy, and it's under the bullying part of the policy. And in the bullying part of the policy, it does actually talk about social media as well, being a form of harassment and bullying. Keith?
Yeah, I don't know, I could be wrong, but is there a security system that could be put in place in some of the schools that would eliminate students from accessing certain sites and certain, that type of thing as far as technology goes?
And there's certain words that if you type into a search engine, will not allow you to search those words. And then there are certain words, phrases, and things that if they're used on the student's Google account, immediately sends an alert to us. And Erin and I have been involved in a number of situations where a student would have sent an email to another student and the language was picked up immediately because there was a threatening word used in it. Or if the word suicide was used in it, we would be immediately alerted, and then we contact the families and the schools to deal with that. Keith?
So just in 2018, obviously you have a database now, or you will have a database based on this, but what were the numbers in 2018 of some of these issues? Like, do you have those statistics without?
I wouldn't have those available.
You wouldn't have, okay, that's fine, thank you, that's fine.
Ola?
Oh, thank you, Colin. Well, just on the last question that Keith brought up, when you mentioned control, I assume that's on the school Wi-Fi system.
So on our any school-based technology devices, whether it be Chromebooks or laptops or whatever devices we have at school, there would be many controls that we would have to keep students safe. The challenge becomes when they're using their own personal device. And while there's not Wi-Fi at most schools, many would have data packages so they can, that's their own personal device, and they can access whatever they access on their own personal device. But on our school-based accounts and our school-based, there's all kinds of controls and systems in place for safety.
Ola?
Okay, so basically you're confirming that you can't control what people are doing on their phones. Can I go back a second to previous thing? What kind of history has there been of complaints? So I just want to get a feeling for what kind of scale of problem we have. Is it like
Of which kind of complaint?
the complaints we're talking about?
The allegations
allegations or
a staff
whatever,
member?
reports from students, from staff, whatever.
I would definitely say it would be yearly,
Yeah.
and probably more than once a year.
Okay.
Ola?
Again, I'm going back to some that Robert mentioned, which was discretion from parent. I'm a parent myself, and what I realize that much as I would like to know what's happening with my child also. No, in many cases, I'm the last one she wants to speak to. So I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit more how you make sure that students are not shying away from talking to somebody because they're afraid that there will immediately be contact to parents.
And I really have no way of knowing that, but I do know that when I've been asked to investigate any kind of an allegation, I do tell the student I'm going to, they've been younger students, they haven't been over 16, but I am going to ask your parent to sit in with me while we have this discussion, because I think at that age, a child would be uncomfortable sitting in a room with an adult that they don't really know to tell their story. But with their parent there, they might feel more comfortable. And I agree with you, I'm a parent as well. I would want to be involved in that discussion with my child. So I have invited parents to those discussions. Ola?
That makes sense. That when we're speaking about children, I completely agree. I guess high school, is borderline child and adult. So once they come and talk to you, like when you are up at higher age levels, there's like two different procedures. One is a disclosure where they want the need to talk to somebody and to let you kind of find out what the problem is, and the other one is to make a formal complaint. Do you have a process for distinguishing between those two, and what would be?
So I take any allegations seriously. If a
Yeah.
student comes forward with an allegation of any kind, it's immediately investigated. And by immediately, I mean immediately. We go
Yeah.
right out. In the situations where I've been involved, I take the student's statement. We don't ask a lot of questions, a lot of leading questions, just can you tell me about what happened? And then I share that information with the HR department. So my work is primarily with the student, at the student level, and then HR would become involved with the allegation itself against the staff member. So I don't know that I discriminate between those two. I think if it's an allegation, it needs to be formally investigated.
Ola?
I guess my question was if the student has any choice as to where it goes.
I think once the
Like,
allegation...
in other words, could the student come in and say, well, I don't really want anybody to know, I just want to tell somebody, record something with that?
I've
Do you have
never been
possibility?
involved in a situation like that, because when a student comes forward to me, they want something to be done. I don't think that we would be able to let that sit.
Okay.
If somebody comes forward with an
Well, and obviously,
allegation...
that would obviously depend on the mistake.
Yeah. You might be able to give the student a certain amount of privacy around it, but you can't let that sit.
No.
Ola?
Did you consult the students as part of the process of developing this policy? Or maybe you mentioned that, but I
It
may
was
have missed
open
that.
to the public, and it
Yeah.
was open to the home
Yeah.
and school to have some feedback into the policy. I think a lot of the work with the students will go with the actual making it live, making it happen within the schools.
Ola?
Thank you. Yeah.
Michelle?
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to just kind of elaborate a little bit on what he was talking about. At the post-secondary level, a student does have the opportunity to take one course of action or the other. The first course of action that they could take is they could make a complaint. They could park that until they're ready to move on. I think that's important to distinguish because not all people are ready to move on. But they do need to state it and then have the ability to come back when they have worked through some of the issues. So I'm going to ask that question again. Based on the post-secondary policy and the fact that there is an option, does the public schools branch have that ability to disclose that something has happened and then later, if they choose, or at the same time, to make that formal complaint? Do they have a choice?
It's not written in our policy that way. It is written in our policy that if an allegation comes forward, then an investigation will take place. And the reason being that they are children, and if an allegation comes forward about a teacher, we would want to be very cautious about that teacher or other staff member remaining in close contact with children. I think an investigation would have to take place. It's something that I can take back to our leadership team, because as you say, you need to revise your policies and look at your policies. We could take it back and ask that question. I come at it from that emotional level of, if there are children involved and we know this to be true, we really need to act on it.
Michelle?
Yeah, and that's fair, but as a female, if something happened and I needed to get it off and then be able to deal with it, whether I'm dealing with an EAP before I'm ready to actually move forward. If you're talking about somebody who's 16 years and over, they do have that, that's different than talking about a 10-year-old. And I do understand when you're talking a staff member, but let's say if it was student to student, so I would ask you to take that back and to review the post-secondary policy and just to have that under advisement. So I appreciate it if you would take that back. In the UPEI sexual violence policy, reporting to police will only be made with the informed consent of the survivor unless there has been an assessed imminent risk of harm as outlined in the policy. And so the public schools branch policy is less clear about how police will be engaged or contacted. Can you elaborate on that for me?
So if there's an allegation comes forward, whether it's student to student or student to staff or staff to student, if it's of a violent nature, we do report to police.
Okay.
Michelle?
And Thank you, Chair. And how is the determination made to contact police? Is it-
So we do have steps that we work through with our principals, and it's if allegation is sexual in nature, we immediately report to child protection. That's immediate. If an allegation is made that involves physical contact that seems not to be of a sexual nature, then we follow these guidelines. Was it out of anger or upset? Then you would follow the red, and that would usually have some kind of a police involvement, depending on how violent the situation was, or was there physical prompting or redirection without anger or upset. So sometimes it can be a misinterpretation too, that I put my hand on your back and guided you. That would be dealt with completely differently.
Okay.
So it would really depend on what the situation was that came forward. We certainly want to look at it and say, if it was redirection, I would have a conversation with that teacher and say, is there another way you could have approached that? But if it was out of anger or upset, then that would be something that we would want to treat more seriously.
Okay.
Michelle?
And what role does the student have in this determination? So if you're defining that, what role?
So part of it is to speak to the student, let them tell their story, and if they're of an appropriate age, to have them write out their story so that you're not questioning them and leading them with questions. If there are witnesses, you would also want to have them either record their story or tell their story so that you can get a full picture of what happened in that room. Again, the parents would probably be called to inform them depending on the incident, and then we would speak to the staff person, and if it was a redirection, we would go over more appropriate ways that you might have done that. If it was a physical in nature, we'd let them know that there was an allegation and that an investigation is going to proceed.
Michelle?
Thank you for that. Can a former student make a complaint if they've already left the public schools branch? And is there an expiry on that?
I don't know of expiries. I guess those would be legal implications of what is the expiry date on reporting a sexual misconduct or a physical assault. That would be for the police to determine. But we would certainly say any student that has a complaint, gone or not gone from our system, we would still want to hear from.
Michelle?
Thank you. And so we've seen members of the public state in the media that they had reported inappropriate behavior, but aren't sure if any action was ever taken. So how could this be?
And I can't really speak to that because I don't know the situation. Anything that's been reported to me since I've been in my role has certainly been investigated, but I can't speak to what might have happened at another time if I don't know the situation.
Michelle?
So how long have you been in your role?
2 years.
2 years, okay.
Michelle?
And in your 2 years, how many times have you had a reported event to you?
I don't have the number in front of me, but I would say 5.
Michelle?
Over the past 2 years? And was there any that were on the books that would have been passed on to you that weren't handled or weren't completed when you took over the role? Was there files passed on?
There were not files passed on that were open investigations at that time, no.
Okay.
Michelle?
What obligations does the public schools branch have to update complainants or reporters on the status of the complaint?
So in the ones that I've been involved with, I have kept the students very much informed of the status of the complaint. We've worked really closely with those students because we wanted to make sure that they had the appropriate supports they needed to be able to move on from that incident. So in the ones I can speak to those, the students have been very much, and the families have been very much informed.
Okay.
Might move on and come back.
Okay,
That's-
yeah.
is that- Corey?
Thanks, Chair. Terry, I was just wondering, if a student has a complaint to make, who do they make that complaint to?
That's a great question, Corey. Typically, you would go to a trusted person within the building. That would be your first step, and it's often a teacher, could be a guidance counselor. The next step would be to go to the administration of the school, to the principal. So sometimes, for example, if a family has a concern, they would go maybe speak to the teacher. If they didn't feel it was resolved, they'd go to the administrator. The administrator's role then, if it's an allegation, if we're talking about this particular presentation, they would come to me as the Director of Student Services, and I would begin an investigation and involve HR. But if a student goes to a trusted person and they feel like nobody took my concerns seriously, they certainly and their families are within their rights to step outside of the school and come to myself or to one of either the director or assistant director of the public schools branch.
Corey?
So, and in a lot of these cases, these, teachers, staff, they're in a position of trust, and students might not feel comfortable going to. So if they don't feel comfortable going to a staff member in the school, who do you recommend they go to?
I would recommend if it's an allegation or something like that, they would come to me.
Okay. And
Corey?
is that, how do they know that though, I guess is?
And I think that's the next step, is that promotion of our policy through infographics and through, publicizing those kinds of phone numbers and that information. And that's where we're kind of saying we have this policy. We've worked really hard with school staffs for them to understand it and make it a live document. But our next step is to get to those kids because they're the ones who also need that information to carry it forward.
Corey?
And I guess so, only complaints that would come to you, you would investigate. Do we have any idea of how many complaints don't actually make it to you?
I don't know what I don't know, but I would certainly hope that anybody out there that has concerns that they have made a complaint or that something has happened and they don't know who to talk to would be able to reach out to us at the public schools branch. I do get a lot of just phone calls from parents who say, I didn't know who to call. So I saw your name and I called, and then we were able to follow up from that way. But it's definitely something we need to make more out there to the public so that they understand that that's part of our role.
Corey?
Those steps that you'd held up there for the who's that for? Is that for teachers and principals or?
So this is steps in dealing with a staff allegation, and this was a presentation that was made to principals. This is just a little, and I think there's a copy there for each of you so that you understand the whole process that was explained to them. This is just I keep this on my wall in my office, and I encourage principals to keep it on their wall so that if a situation comes up, they've got the steps right there in front of them. And then what's on the back of that is what we give to a staff member if an allegation comes forward about them so that they understand what this means, what this could look like. It talks to them about getting in touch with the EAP. It talks to them about if you're on an administrative leave, you're not to talk to staff members at the school or students, you're not to use your group wise. So all of that is outlined for the staff member. Because it's pretty unsettling to have someone come to you and say, there's been an allegation made and you need to leave. So we give them this document to accompany that.
Corey?
How long has that been in place?
This was brought out in 2017, and I think the presentation that I put out there for you was done in maybe late 2017, early 2018. It was prior to my taking this role, that presentation was done.
Corey?
Has there been anything in place before that? Or?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't think anything as formal as this.
Corey?
Because I'm just curious, in the case of Roger Jabor, if something like this had been in place, I'm not sure how some of these incidents weren't reported to police based on what you had just read out, in a sexual nature. Automatically that has to, or abuse, it has to go to police. And I feel like, as Michelle said in statements in the media, it seemed quite clear what these students were complaining about, and it was brushed aside to a certain extent, and we wouldn't do such a thing, or this, I don't think this is actually what happened. You must be thinking of it differently. But if we were following a policy like this, perhaps this would have been caught a lot earlier than, not 30 years into his teaching career, or however long it was. So that's kind of just my comment on that. Thanks.
Robert?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Terry. Bear with me, this came to me after the fact, so I'm back on the question. My question is, if an allegation is made, are support services offered immediately, or does it have to wait for an investigation? And I guess it would, I can see some that would be an allegation that could take some time to investigate in its entirety. So if the individual feels they need some support service, is that offered right away, or does it have to wait till after some aspect of the investigation begins?
It is offered to the students
Okay.
right away, whether it be through their school guidance counselor. I've talked to some families about whether or not they have access to EAP and referred them to an outside service. One family that I dealt with recently went through victim services for support for their child, but we always offer the different things that are available to their child.
There's no limitations on the resources, or if the individual says, I need to see psychiatrist, and there's no limitations on who they can see. It's not standard to school counselor or anything like that.
There's not a lot of psychiatrists available, but we can help them with that through online.
Optimistically, I guess.
Yeah, optimistically.
Okay.
More psychologists.
Yeah, and the basis of my question is that there's no limitations on any part of it till an investigation is held, because...
Oh, no, we don't hold back those services while the investigation
Okay.
is taking place. If someone feels victimized, then they need that support right away.
Right away, perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, great, thanks.
Robert?
Yeah, I'm good for that.
Michelle?
Great, thanks, Chair. So I want to go through section, it's 2.5 in the safe and caring learning environment procedures.
Procedures.
I'm just going to read it into record. So a member of the school community who witnesses an incident or who becomes aware of an incident that negatively impacts the school climate is encouraged to report the incident to school administration or public schools branch administration if appropriate. So I'm going to follow up on the members' questions about if something is seen or witnessed. When I read the word encouraged or if appropriate, I would read that to be, I guess, loose wording in a policy if somebody witnesses something and they don't bring it forward. And so this suggests that there's discretionary approach to reporting incidents within schools. So what obligations do school employees have to report harassment and misconduct in schools given the wording?
So employees must report any kind of harassment or misconduct. I think that wording is around if a member of the school community witnesses an incident that could negatively impact the school climate. So that could be the students were in the hall, they were using poor language, but given the circumstances of what just happened, they just came out of their basketball game and they were swearing, and that would affect school climate. It's a first time, we use progressive discipline. You might stop and speak to that student and say, you can't use that kind of language in here, it really affects our school climate. Please, use better language. Now, the next time that student is offending in the same way with progressive discipline, you might go to another step where you have them in the office and you have a conversation. So I believe that's what that's referring to at that part of that policy.
Michelle?
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so let's say I witness this happening today. You witness it happening tomorrow. He witnesses it the next day. Where is that information maintained so that people are aware?
So that's part of what we're teaching our staff through documentation. If anything that happens with me, I write it down. So if I get a phone call, I would write down Michelle Beaton called me on this date and why. And that's what we're encouraging our staff to do. So schools do have team meetings where they come in and they talk about grade 7. Let's talk about our grade 7 class. Anybody having any problems with the grade 7 class, anything that we need to know about? That would be one place where it would come out. If a student is a repeat offender of being caught smoking or swearing or those kinds of things, it quickly becomes known within a staff. I spoke to him yesterday. Okay, today he's going to go to the office for that.
Michelle?
Is there, I guess, so you spoke to the policy and how you would address and whether it was violent or sexual in nature, etc. So is there something along this that gives people that are part of the school community more information as to what the inappropriate behavior and what actions they should take if they witness something?
So each one of the parts of the policy are outlined in the procedure. So under bullying, and it gives a definition of that. And that goes right into slander or spreading of rumors, petty theft, territorial bans, coercion, cyberbullying. It outlines all of it.
Okay.
Did I answer your question? Sorry.
Yeah, they have to know the definitions then from that point. Okay.
Michelle?
And under the staff to student response portion of the procedures, the parent guardian of the student is only involved in the investigation of sexual misconduct if the situation suggests that it's necessary. So how does the school board decide this?
So, can I go back to find the part? Staff, student, the parent or guardian of the student involved will be contacted if the situation suggests it is necessary. And that's language that we've put in a lot of the policy, and you'd see it in a lot of policies, because there's always going to be a situation outside of the norm. The one that you brought up yourself, if a student comes and says, I have this, it's a concern, I don't want it to go public, I don't want my family to know about it, can you do an investigation without me being named? So there would be a prime example of when you might say, yes, we could start our investigation without naming you at this point, because of those very reasons that you brought forward, that this is a 16-year-old girl who's trying to deal with her own feelings around it. So that might be an example.
Michelle?
And so who determines that?
I think that would be determined in consultation with the student, given the age of the student. If it was a younger student, the family would be contacted right away, because I don't think a younger student should be making that judgment on their own. But you know, it is something we'll take under consultation.
Michelle?
So, sorry, and I meant from the staff perspective or from this public schools branch perspective. So who makes that determination if it's necessary? If the situation suggests it's necessary, who is it that makes that determination?
So these allegations come to me, and I, in any situation I've been involved in, as I said, have always contacted the parent and invited the parent actually to be a part of the interviewing process. I've never been in a situation where I've judged it unnecessary, and it hadn't even really come to my mind until what you said about if a student did say that. So that would be why that would be written in the policy, would be to protect innocent people if it should come up. I haven't yet been in a situation where I didn't see it necessary to contact a parent.
Okay,
Michelle?
final question for now. So based on what you just said, so what does the school board decide? Like, how does the school board decide this? And then, so are you also saying that the input of the student will be taken into consideration in that decision when the wording is, like when it comes to that staff to student response?
I think that gives you that opening, but it would also have to depend on the situation and the age of the student.
Okay.
And I think the student would have to know that at some point, if we go forward with this, which we would have to go forward with it, more information may come about.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you.
These are a couple of questions here on the mental health kind of related. So can a victim of sexual assault be accommodated without penalty? Like not be put in the same class as the accused while the investigation's going on, or how does that work?
Yeah, and it gets really tricky when it's student to student, especially with young offenders, because we should not have that information. So that becomes difficult. We have made accommodations for students to move out of a classroom. We've certainly made accommodations for students to move out of a school because of a sexual assault, and that's been in a student-to-student situation. When it's staff to student, if it's of a sexual nature or if it's of a serious violent nature, the staff member would have been removed from the building on an administrative leave. But yes, those accommodations definitely need to be made for the mental health of the student.
So, and the other aspect of this is after someone goes through this ordeal, there may be some sort of PTSD effects. Are the schools equipped with identifying that and ensuring that those students have fair treatment after the fact because this situation brought on whatever those mental issues may be?
So trauma-informed care has become a pretty big piece of the work that Student Services has been doing, and certainly one of the areas that I'm doing a lot of my study in is the effects of trauma on students and on young people. And we've had several speakers in this year. We had Dr. Jody Carrington spoke at the Teachers Conference on trauma in children, and a lot of my Student Services team went to a conference, a 2-day conference with Justice that was on trauma, and we're trying to disseminate all that information to our schools, because it is a big part of what we deal with every day. Keith?
Yeah, obviously, if someone was a grade A student and all of a sudden a situation happened and they started to falter, it would be pretty identifiable. But the other thing, and I'm not sure which member asked this, but it was something, what about anonymity in some of these situations? And when does the red flag actually get put up? Even though there may not be charges, there was an investigation, there was nothing that was found significant to proceed. When does the red flag actually go up if there's been 2 or 3 incidents of maybe the same individual, to say, okay, even though nothing's been proved or it was insignificant, when is that point saying, okay, there's something obviously going wrong here? And how does that come into play?
And it's hard to say it would be 1 or it would be 2 or it would be 3 reporters. What we have done is in situations where there really wasn't anything founded, but somebody did feel something, is we've asked the principal to be more of a presence in that classroom. Can you just drop into the classroom? Can you be in the classroom? Can you keep an eye on what's going on in the classroom, just to be sure? Even though nothing came out of our investigation, we still want to honor the feelings of the student and try and just be a little bit more present in that area. So when does it become more is a really hard question to answer. It really depends on the circumstances, but it's not an investigation is done and it's closed. It's still, you still want to honor the person that came forward and continue to be the eyes and the ears in that situation.
Just curious on if I put my name, if I put a complaint in against an individual today, my name is attached to that complaint, obviously, and the individual's name would be attached to it. Who sees that within the administration?
Right.
Like,
so when I would be speaking to someone about an allegation that came forward, I would never name the accuser to that person. Now, if it went to a court of law or something, then that person's name might come out. But for the I'm not going to try and say the word, but to keep it anonymous for the student, we don't go to the teacher and say, Heath McDonald has brought forward an allegation against you. We would just say, there has been an allegation brought forward against you, and we're going to have to do an investigation. You're being placed on administrative leave while that's happening. So whether they figure out who brought the allegation or not, it's not stated from us.
and all that is recorded, obviously.
All documented.
So would it be appropriate to number students for confidentiality purposes in this process? Just curious, instead of using names, because this could touch a human resource person, this could touch a teacher, it could touch an EA, it could touch a principal, it could touch the janitor, for all I know. I don't know. Whoever that individual goes to. But there could be a string of people which would possibly eliminate someone coming forward more forthwith if it's seen to that level, whereas if it was a number with a complaint, because basically you're withholding a name too. And then if that number keeps reappearing, obviously there's something that...
Okay, I see what you mean now. So you would mean like the teacher there would be a number next to the...
Teacher or the students.
Or like the person that the allegation was coming forward on.
Or the student as well.
Why
wouldn't the students be identified? They likely are identified, maybe they are in the school system.
They would be in my documentation.
Yeah.
So, I'm just trying to understand a little bit. So if you're saying maybe a student has brought back forward many allegations?
Yeah, try to create more anonymity, I guess. So if it's brought to the human resource person and they say number 3451, just made an accusation against teacher number 623, and this is the fourth one, or whatever. Didn't mean to add the fourth one in there, but you know what I'm trying to create anonymity for students, I guess. So the whole community of the school doesn't know that they made an accusation just by who they told.
Right.
Because they're not going to go directly to you, I wouldn't assume. If it was a janitor, he's going to go to the principal or the human resource and then to Terry.
Yeah.
So there's 4 or 5 people already that know.
Yeah, that I came forward. Yeah, no, it's good to take under consideration. Thank you.
I'm done.
Keith?
Thank you.
James?
Thanks, Chair, and thank you both for coming in today and providing this presentation. Just a couple of quick questions. And I know you said you don't readily have the stats at hand, but with, just say for instance, the last 2 years, because that's how long you've been in your position, what would you say is the most frequent complaint that would come through? Student to student, staff to students?
There are a lot of student to student that would fall under this policy, with the bullying and harassment, with threats, with verbal abuse, with theft and vandalism. I would have to say student to student under this one.
Okay.
James?
Thanks, Chair. Now, it's been a number of years since I was in public school. When is this first introduced? At what grade, this policy?
So this policy goes from grades K to 12.
Okay.
But making it more user-friendly is our next goal for those younger children, especially with like infographics would get some of those younger children, and finding ways to bring it into the classroom to make it a living document. That's the next steps in it. But it would, in my mind, encompass children from K to 12.
Okay.
James?
Thanks, Chair. And so when children start school, whether it's K to 6 or whether it's intermediate or high school, is there an orientation conducted in the first day, the first week?
Yes, so with the kindergarten, they have their welcome to kindergarten,
Right.
and then they have their parent information nights for kindergarten. And as they transition from school to school, there would be a similar kind of process. So if you're going from grade 6 at West Royalty to grade 7 at Queen Charlotte, there's usually a half day of orientation in the spring. And then they would have an orientation once they arrive at school in the fall as well.
James?
Thanks, Chair. So in the development of these policies, have we looked at our neighboring jurisdictions or other school boards across Canada to see what they have in place?
So that scan has been being done just in this past year, but it was on the work plan. I should have had that up there, but it is on the work plan to scan all of our Atlantic provinces to see what they're doing. And I think they've even looked at some in Ontario.
And when the policy would have been developed originally, that's just part of the process, is we do a wide jurisdictional scan to see what other school boards have in relation to this context. So that would be typical practice anyway.
Okay.
James?
Thanks, Chair. So what are the next steps? Where are we going from here now?
So we do really want, and I keep saying it because I really believe it, we really want to make this the document that schools function under, the umbrella document. So our next steps would be to try and get those parent-student friendly versions made available, and we have had some talks with some communications people around the infographics and the ways that we could present that, whether it's posters or pamphlets or things that would get into a school and into a child's hands. Mm-hmm. So that's definitely a next step for us. The social media, we've created some social media pages for the PSB in the last year. We've just been starting to trial them, putting out our kindergarten registrations, putting out our snow announcements, those kinds of things, and they are being well viewed and well received. So we would like to start linking some of our policy to our social media. We've talked about the Kids Helpline and that we should be promoting that more for students who might need a place to go for some kind of help. To have the schools, and some have already done this, but to have the schools link our policy, this policy in particular, to their website, because a lot of families would go to a school website before they go to our website.
Correct,
If they're going to order school lunches, they're going to go to the school website, so they might find it there. Just to keep working with principals about that this is a responsibility of theirs to make sure that all their staff members know about new policy, but to revisit the old policy and revisit this policy. We've made these for every school to put up in their school so that they have it readily available to refer to. to have the principals discuss this with their home and school groups. That would definitely be something that we want to do go forward. I will make myself available to any school communities or DACs who want to discuss this, and that will be a conversation that we'll be having with principals. And just to continue working on school codes of conduct, with involving students in developing that school code of conduct and how it links to this policy. I think it's important that we continue to link it back, that these are the things, the violence, the weapons, the theft that will not be tolerated within our school code of conduct.
James?
Just one last thing, Chair. I want to echo what Heath McDonald was saying too, with regards to anything that we can put in place to help secure the anonymity of in particular, the students. It's needs to definitely be looked at.
Thank you for that feedback.
Yeah, thanks, Chair.
Okay, I'm wondering, you kind of talked about this a little bit, but I guess my concern is kind of the oversight of this, but can you repeat how teachers and staff are educated about their requirements under the policy, as well as kind of what constitutes inappropriate behavior? Because there's a lot, you had mentioned in one section the wording is loose. I find the wording loose throughout the document. There's a lot of kind of encouraged, I can't off the top of my head think of the exact words, so I'm not going to say anymore. But there's a lot left up for, in my mind, as I looked at it, kind of interpretation. And we talked about differences in people and what might be acceptable to me for example, kids outside playing with sticks. You know, I know it's a school rule, but kids play with sticks, right? Whereas other people are no, kids are not allowed to play with sticks. So there's perceptions. And so first of all, how are they educated, teachers and staff, about this policy and what's inappropriate?
So we did the education piece with the principals and the support staff to make sure that those people had it. And then we tasked principals with doing the education with their staff. And we did give them the work plan that we used for when we educated them to use with some of their staff. And we did check with some staffs and say, did you guys hear about this policy and how was it presented to you? And in many of the cases, they did use the work plan that we had used. I think we've become much better at the sexual misconduct part of that. That's not a call that I get to make or you get to make. If it's sexual misconduct, it must be reported. I think that as a public, as a community, as a school, all of that we've become much better at understanding that. I think where we're kind of talking is like verbal abuse. It gets a little bit, you might tolerate it in your classroom, but the person in the next room wouldn't tolerate that in their classroom. So that's one where it does get a little bit dicey. And that's where we do need to continue to work with our schools on what does that really look like? What does that sound like? It's like saying, this child must be respectful in my classroom. Well, what looks like respect in your classroom looks completely different maybe in my classroom. So you're right, some of those terms are open to interpretation, and we'll continue to work with our staff on that. I think PEITF has done a really good job too of working with staff on appropriate and inappropriate behavior, what's acceptable and what isn't acceptable. So it is a job of many people. To make sure the staffs are informed on this. And QP is very good to work with their staff on, what's appropriate and what's not appropriate when interacting with students. So we continue to move forward with it. Is it an area that continues to need work? I think in the definition of some of these things, there's still work to be done.
And how are students educated about the rights and protections in this policy?
So, and again, that's something that I said we see as a go forward, that we don't feel like we've really got there yet. We're working on it and have talked to our principals about, bringing that into their school code of conduct. But I think with the infographics and the getting it into the hands of kids in a user-friendly way will make a huge difference. The new curriculum, the new health curriculum, is definitely addressing that, because it does talk about consent and it does talk about a different, I don't have it right in front of me here. Thank you. So the different areas that it covers is the consent, gender norms, bystander intervention, sexual assault. It does really get into that. And that's in the grade 9 curriculum, but in the grades even 1 to 3, they're talking about healthy relationships, how to understand what consent means. So they are bringing it down to a very young level.
And just, I have a few more questions, but really a quick one. That step sheet that you showed us earlier,
What to do with an allegation.
yeah, is that laid out in the policy?
No, this was a different presentation, but I do have a presentation for you there on how to respond if an allegation comes forward. This was made from that.
Okay.
So that's just the PowerPoint that was used with principals, and then this was just sort of a little cheat sheet.
So that's not included in the policy?
It's not part of the policy. It's just, so the policy might speak to if a sexual misconduct happens, that they're to contact me, but it also gets into if it's other kinds of allegations too.
Right.
And if it's sexual, they contact Child and Family, but they can contact me. That's the first call they make.
Yeah, because I find duty to report kind of trumps a lot of
It
things
does.
in there.
Yeah.
So I was confused as I was reading it, because I thought some of it seems almost irrelevant
Yeah.
because of duty to report. And so, as you mentioned earlier, is kind of the way that I described sometimes when I'm reading a policy, you know, these words are beautiful on paper, but how do we put them into the culture? And so, who is ultimately responsible for setting that culture in all of the schools?
So I guess ultimately the administrator is responsible, the principal, but I would hope it would be done, because school climate can't be dictated. It would be done with all the parties that participate in that school. So students need to be a part of determining school climate and culture. Staff need to be a part of that. The administrator will lead it, but all of the people, the parents, the children, all of the people that belong to that school community. And even in this policy, like, it does touch upon the fact that it's everyone that's involved in that school that becomes a part of determining the climate of the school.
Yeah, and in our schools, as we know, a student comes in and there's a huge power imbalance right away. And if you take into consideration how vulnerable a student might be in terms of, you know, whatever vulnerable means to them, if it's their family life, or, you know, not being a strong academic student, or whatever that looks like. So thinking of, you know, in light of some of the cases we have seen in the news recently, culture has been suggested as a big reason why inappropriate behavior has been allowed to persist for so long. So what do you think needs to be done within our schools to change that culture? Because there was a question that Corey asked, I think, when he said how many people haven't reported. And that's, you know, for every person who reports, you know, there's way more that haven't, right? And whether it is a legitimate concern or not, it's been experienced by them. And so what do we need to do to change the culture?
And I think we just need to keep empowering our young people. I mean, I think we're better in 2020 than maybe we were in 2010. And we need to continue to keep that at the forefront of our teaching with our young people, at the forefront of the culture that we set in our school, is that these young people do need to have that. There can't be a power imbalance that great. It's something that we all need to collectively work on, whether it's legislatures, or it's teachers, or it's families, or it's people who just see a school as a community. We all need to work on that power imbalance. And I think we are getting better as a society, but it's a societal thing as much as it's a school thing.
And it's tough, because if I'm thinking off the top of my head, you know, I've worked with a lot of different educators, and I've met a lot of different educators, and there's the people who will pass things off as jokes, or really inappropriate jokes, make people feel really uncomfortable, but they offer something really unique to the school. And so, you know, it's changing that dynamic, and like you said, it is sometimes explaining what is inappropriate, because things that I might have laughed at 10 years ago, I'm not laughing at anymore. You know, it's the more we know. So I appreciate that's our biggest challenge right there. I guess we kind of answered that question already. So under the operating procedure 605.1, the Director of Student Services is responsible for receiving allegations of sexual misconduct, and we've already answered how many were received. So I don't know if you fully reported this, but I'll ask these two questions together, and if you've already answered them, maybe I'll kind of add a third, but how are the complaints reported to? So a complaint comes to you, or a complaint comes to whomever, they would take it to you. And so what does that look like in the department? So what, you know, you kind of already talked about what you would do with that. Yeah. You've already answered that. So then, are any of these complaints reported to the public? Like, is there any thing about this, as we move forward, there's no public reporting on any of this right now. Okay. I have a lot of questions and none at the same time. Can I make a final statement about it? Okay, we made some notes. So in light of, I'll just read them. But in light of news stories about what has been going on, it's important that the public has confidence in what this public school board is doing to address sexual misconduct in schools. So what our office would like to see really strongly articulated in the policies and the procedures. And I think whenever we talked about in the beginning the public consultation piece, and I didn't feel, and it might have just been the language, but when students should, and it should be something that, and maybe it was just the language I heard, but that there's ample opportunity. The opportunity is given to them during class time, that they have, maybe it's an assignment. And if they have nothing to say, I have nothing to say on this, but they are the ones who matter in this. None of us matter, really. I mean, of course, processes are in place are important, but their voices really need to be in here. Clearly articulated in policies and procedures, clearly articulated pathways for disclosures and complaints, and the processes and expectations associated with each. What accommodation options are available to students, and that these accommodations may be accessed without the need to file a complaint. Clarity on how public school board administrators, teachers, and staff will be trained and educated on their responsibilities under this policy and its procedures. Promoting the policy and procedures to students and their parents so they have an understanding of their rights and obligations. Acknowledgement of the need for cultural sensitivity when dealing with these issues. For example, students who have immigrated to PEI might have less cultural familiarity and as a result might feel less comfortable coming forward with an incident. Aggregated data on incidents to promote accountability. So for example, how many complaints have been filed in a year, action taken, no information associated, no identifying information associated with it. Clearly articulated requirements to review the policy frequently and include public and of course student being crucial input in the review process, and overall less discretionary provisions to promote clarity of process. So again, coming back to that language because it's very, it's not really clear. And if you aren't familiar with duty to report for whatever reason, that's what you've got to follow, right? So Absolutely. It might not be as clear. So just a few points to move forward. Thank you again for your presentation. And are there any other, Michelle?
Sorry, I do. So if a friend wanted to report something on behalf of a student, what is the process there, and then how would you address the student?
So a friend could certainly come forward and report, but at some point we would have to have confirmation from the student that they felt that this happened and that they wanted that report to be investigated.
Okay.
Michelle?
I'm just going to make a statement. As a female, I know how difficult it is for somebody to come forward to talk about sexual assault. There's still a stigma that's attached to it. There's feelings of the victim that they find difficult to get pushed past and to be able to come out and talk about it publicly. And that is something that I believe that the school system really should be also using in your education, and giving students, especially, whomever it was that might have been a victim of sexual violence, the words to use, the platform to be able to use those words. And I 100% agree that if you had five reported incidents, there were many more. And I just want to make a statement of, on December 6th, when we were at the memorial for the mass shooting, one of those mothers said to me after that, she has spent so much time trying to make her daughter feel safe. And now she's sending her daughter off to university, and she's making it very clear to her daughter that because this percentage of people who are victims of sexual assault, she is trying to now make her daughter feel unsafe because that's a world that we live in. And I think that it's important that when we talk about our children, that they realize that there is not a stigma associated to it. We need to give them the place to talk about it, whether it be with their friends or with somebody who's safe. But there is still really a huge challenge for people to come forward and talk about sexual assault.
There certainly is.
And I think that that needs to be in the education system.
And I think that's part of the grade 9 curriculum, is to give students that voice. It's going to be there for those students. You're right, there are older students that still don't have that voice and don't feel safe. I do, just for the record, want to be clear that those 5 allegations that came forward were not all of a sexual nature. Just so that we're really clear on that. Some of them were more of a physical nature. So I wasn't sure that came up clearly, but thank you very much.
Michelle?
I think I'm okay.
And the microphone section too, this just popped up, another specific kind of curriculum.
Have you seen it?
I was the safe space when she released her video for that. Very powerful, deals with a lot of heavy things. So actually, I'm glad that this was brought up because I just remembered. But is it now? Because when I had first seen it was in the education system, I thought it was fabulous. It needs to be there. And it was a resource, so it wasn't curriculum, which is fine. Is there something in place? Because if it's not in curriculum, my fear would be, because that is to be presented in its entirety. You cannot pull pieces out of that because there's no context and it's damaging, right? And there's a lot of things in there. If you pulled it out of context, all you would see is anger and not moving past that. So there's a lot to be unpacked within that. And I'm wondering, is it's still a resource?
It was given to us from the Department of Education as an invaluable tool that's linked to the grade 9 curriculum. So that sounds like resource to me, but I'm not 100% sure because curriculum does come from the department.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that's really important to note in that is if you are using a resource like the microphone project, that you're aware of what trauma can look like in response to that, because you could be triggering somebody's memories, and you want to have people on standby when you're doing something like that. That's just super important to mention that.
And so in that, there would be no specific training around microphone for teachers. I don't mean to pick on the microphone, but it's the example that was brought up.
Yeah, because it's curriculum is department, I don't really know the answer to that.
Because that also kind of re-raises that concern for me, only because it needs to be there. It's fabulous, and it needs to be presented in its full entirety. Otherwise, could be damaging if taken out of context and not. I'm going to use the word taught, but not taught, kind of properly or
in the proper way especially
and without
considering
that
trauma.
And that's what I was just going to say, without that trauma-informed approach. So is trauma-informed approach is something that is kind of scaling down to teaching, like to teachers. I know EAs have a lot of training in that, but are teachers starting to get more training in trauma-informed approaches?
So our counseling consultants and our psychologists would all have that background, and our counseling consultants have done some work on trauma-informed care, and they are working with teachers around trauma. I think that if you were at the teachers conference this year, the talk from Jodie Carrington really got it going. Got a lot of people thinking about it. A lot of teachers are reading Kids These Days, which is her book. And it's starting to get that conversation really moving to a place where it needs to be.
Yeah, that's great. That's really important. Yeah. All right, any other questions or comments before we move on? All right, well, thank you so much for coming in. It was very valuable. And we will take a little recess while you kind of get your stuff organized.
And there's lots of handouts there if people want them. If not, just shred them up.
Thank you. Welcome back, everybody. We just have a couple of more things to look at here. There is no correspondence that I've received. A review of scheduling on the 21st, which is next Tuesday. We will be hearing from John Pritchard on the school nutrition program. And then on the 28th, there's a slight time change. It will be at 4 p.m. to accommodate volunteer schedules. And we will be hearing from Home and School. I know Corey Thomas will be here. I'm not sure if it's a group of them or if it's just Corey will be presenting to us on elected school boards. Any new business? Robert?
Chair, I have a new business piece there. It's probably more related to the presenters from the last standing committee. Of course, this is my first meeting back. But Chair, I'd like to put forward a motion, and that motion is a motion urging government to offer the school lunch program free of charge for all island students. This is an opportunity to end lunch shaming and stigma. It's time to give every child a free lunch at school. This solution would improve the social climate in schools by making income differences less visible, cause less financial stress for families, and better equip our students to learn. Now, obviously, Chair, our Liberal caucus stance on this has been strong as an issue as recent as the last standing committee meeting, but prior to that, in both the fall session of the legislature and the spring session, both during committee of the whole, I believe, if I'm going from recollection. You know, obviously, what an opportunity, what a perfect opportunity to let our students, set them on a path, to thrive and excel completely. When you look at reports and studies that have been done, they all indicate that, nutrition in schools leads to much better outcomes as far as learning, as far as behaviors, as far as social interactions. So we have an opportunity before us with this new program that's coming out, and to really do this in a good fashion. And as I mentioned, the financial stigma to families is real, and there's already been discussion that when this program rolls out, there would be some kind of subsidy for that. So there's already some investment put in there, but who better to invest in than our island school students, our children who are the future of our province. Obviously I know there's financial aspects to this, but a recent announcement of a new $46 million coming in federal transfers. Obviously there's been surpluses the last two fiscals. So I think, as I said, what better investment could we make as a government of Prince Edward Island than to our island schools children's, and so I'm looking for support on that motion. I know I talked a lot after it. If I need to read it again and ask for a vote on that, that would be my request.
Maybe you could reread that for us.
Sure. So it is a motion urging government to offer the school lunch program free of charge for all island students. This is an opportunity to end lunch shaming and stigma. It's time to give every child free lunch at school. The solution would improve the social climate in schools by making income differences less visible, cause less financial stress for families, and better equip our island students to learn.
that is a wonderful idea. We're just going to take a little recess just to kind of find our way forward there. Thank you for that. We were just kind of chatting about the best way forward, and we discussed, so on the 28th, Ryan and I had discussed about having a pause then to talk about recommendations, because at that point we would have heard from all of our presenters. So we're wondering if, coming from the committee, if you would agree it would be more effective to put it in a recommendation, which we will be working on. We have a meeting scheduled the 21st to 28th, and then we'll be working on recommendations.
To that point, my personal feeling is this doesn't supersede any recommendation that may be forward. Actually, it would strengthen a recommendation that was probably coming forward later by the sounds of things anyway. So, I will stand to the motion as I presented today that I would ask, it could be debated or voted on. But I don't think it would supersede any recommendation that would be made previously or going forward. It would just strengthen that if that was the case. And the motion is simply to urge government for consideration to offer the school lunches for free. So I'll stand to my original request for vote on the motion.
And so, Robert, on next Tuesday, Chef John Pritchard is coming in to talk about school nutrition programming. Does that doesn't affect?
That doesn't affect
Yeah.
what I'd like to see happen today. I'm willing to debate it or have discussion on it. I don't want to leave here today and the story is that the committee did not support a motion to encourage government to look at, free school lunches for everybody. I don't want that to be the case. This is simply to urge government to pursue this. There's been discussion on it in the past. There's already a subsidy piece in the pilot or whichever model is chosen to be the go-forward model in the fall. So this is simply, a request of support, which will strengthen the recommendation that you put as the chair of the report.
And the recommendation that I was going to suggest kind of adds on to what you would, so a yes and.
Yes, absolutely. That's the way I see that too.
Yeah. I guess. Does the committee have any suggestions on how they would like to move forward with this?
I guess, Chair.
James?
Thanks, Chair. Just, I guess, more of a question than a suggestion. I know from my previous experience being in opposition for far too long, anytime that we would bring a motion forward, whether it was in the Legislative Assembly or whether it was at a standing committee meeting, we were always told that you can't bring a motion forward that's going to call on government to spend money. Just wondering if that has been looked at.
I can't bring legislation that calls on government, but I think I can bring a motion. And I think that
we had many instances where we brought motions to the floor and motions to committee that were not permitted because it was calling on government to spend money. I'm not saying I'm against it. I think anything that we can do to strengthen the school program, but I just want to make sure that we're following the rules. That's all.
I believe this committee operates like every other committee under Robert's rules, which, a motion can be made off the floor at any meeting that I'm aware of. Obviously, I agree with James. This is simply a motion that will strengthen a request later on that I believe is coming from the committee anyway, and just that'll be it'll help the government to look at that. It's not saying government must. It's not saying government may. It's just simply urging government to take a very serious look at it.
And so, at the first of your amendment, your motion, we urge government to
A motion urging government to offer the school lunch program free of charge for all island students.
If we were to put in, for now, and this is no opposition to what you're saying at all, Robert, we're just trying to figure out how we can move forward with it. If we were to put even like urge government to consider, and then that's not asking them to spend money at this point, not saying we're not going to put this in.
I'd like it to
go
read
for it.
exactly how I have it read. I'd like it to be voted on. I'd like it to either be passed or defeated, and then that will set the stage for what's next.
Chair.
Yes.
My suggestion would be to have the honourable member maybe to defer his motion until our next meeting so that the chair and the clerk has an opportunity to actually go back and look at the wording and perhaps work with the honourable member to make sure that last thing I want to see is a motion come to the floor and then we find out after the fact that it was passed or not passed with improper wording. I just want to make sure that we're doing it right.
So in that case, I will still put forward the motion, ask for a vote, ask for it to be defeated if that's what you choose to do, and then, we'll look at an opportunity to revisit with a different motion down the road if that's what's appropriate. But I like the motion to stand as it's written. I'd like it to be voted on. I'd like it to be passed or defeated today, if I can. Or consider urge. It's the same thing.
I'm going to take a brief recess. So our two options this afternoon, so anyone can amend the motion today if they like. And we can also decide whether we want to do that today or postpone it to another day. What does the committee think? Ernie?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just, I guess to my colleague's question or point that was raised with regard to a motion and whether the motion is in order if it ultimately results in the calling upon government to expend dollars. We have former Minister of Finance across the way. Just wondering if former government members do recall instances either in committee or on the floor of the House or legislature where motions were ruled out of order because they did call upon government to expend dollars.
In the legislature, obviously, many motions would cause government to spend dollars. In committee, I'm not sure of the history because this is my first round of committees, so I'm not sure. So I'll leave that up to the clerk. I have no idea.
Is it possible to get a written copy so that we can see clearly? I've tried to copy it down word for word, but I just want to ensure that I have the motion worded.
Okay, this working copy that I have, or do you want a particular one that you will?
No, that's fine, just so I can see what the wording is in particular. So, okay. So just to clarify, so it starts here.
So it just starts here, yeah. Urging government to offer school lunch program free of charge for all Allen students. And then explanatory.
I think the word urge.
Okay. So the motion put forward is to urge government to offer the school lunch program free of charge for all island students.
So, the problem is around the word, well, urging government to offer the school lunch program. So a non-government member making this, we would have to have someone amend it to urging government to consider offering the school lunch program in order to vote on it today.
Oh, sorry.
You go ahead. No, you go ahead.
So I've just explained that, so with motions that have come forward to the Legislative Assembly, that's right, they can't be directing government to spend funds. So often we'll see wording like urging government to consider something around a program. So it's offering a recommendation or a suggestion, but it's not directing the spending of public funds. That's usually the word that we've seen around different motions in the past. Just to kind of make sure that it's not a direct, direction.
But isn't
Ola?
urge already a softer word? It doesn't say shall or must, we say urge.
And that's
You're
true.
putting
So,
it in as a recommendation from the committee. That's much stronger than urge. If it's coming as a recommendation, which I believe it is, that's much stronger, recommend rather than urge. So, you know, your thinking on this one is, this is the softest term, urge, than recommend.
Usually with our, yeah, we'll leave it to the committee how they
Let's
want
vote
to do
on it.
So
If you believe that it's not right, then just defeat
Is
it.
everyone comfortable with voting on it as worded?
Call the question.
Should we vote on that?
All I'm asking is to be able to vote on a motion that is correct parliamentary language. That's all I'm asking for. And that's why I even said, like, why don't we just simply defer it until next week's meeting? So that we can make sure that we have the proper ruling.
Our two options are, we either vote on it as worded today, or we vote to postpone it to another day. A committee member would have to move that. Heath?
So correct me if I'm wrong in parliamentary procedure, but there's actually a motion on the floor now. So either you have to vote for it, accept an amendment to it, or defeat it.
There's other, sorry, under that particular rule in the rules of the Legislative Assembly, there's also an option to postpone it to a certain day. So if the committee agreed as a whole that they wanted to postpone it to a certain day,
Yeah.
that motion can also be made when a question is under debate.
So is it majority or everyone? That has to defer it to the committee.
It's a majority. It would be another, so as you can make a motion to amend a motion, you can also make a motion to postpone it to a certain day. Those are allowed when another question is under debate.
And I am not allowed to pick. I must get my direction from the committee.
I'd like for it to be voted on verbatim as the way it's written, and then I'll take another stab at it later if something needs to be done.
Is everyone okay with that?
Yeah.
Ernie?
I just want to make sure that we are following proper procedure, proper parliamentary language, what have you. You know, and I'll be the first to admit that I'm relatively new to this. Certainly we have two members across the floor and my colleague here that have much more experience with proper process, procedure than I do. When I put it out to the former Minister of Finance with regard to is it in order, is it out of order, the wording of a motion such as this, and didn't really get a clear answer. That, Chair, is my concern. Do appreciate the member bringing it forward. I think that it has a lot of weight to it, but I do want to make sure that we're following proper procedure.
Question. So if we voted today, and as I said earlier, I'm not against the motion. I just want to make sure that the proper parliamentary language is being used in anything that particularly that we vote on. So if we vote on it today and it passes, what happens then if in a week's time it's discovered that no, it wasn't proper parliamentary language, and is the motion then null or void, or does it have to be voted on to be rescinded and then amended?
I have a comment.
Ola?
I was just wondering, instead of having these two different things, outcome, whether James Aylward could make an amendment which essentially is to postpone the voting till next week. Then we can vote on the amendment first, and then next week vote on the thing. It's kind of a different way for the same thing.
I don't think I have, I don't believe it's in my rights to amend the motion that we postpone or defer it. It would have to be a completely separate motion, and we couldn't deal with another motion until we deal with this motion. Sorry.
I'm going to suggest, oh, sorry,
Go ahead,
James.
Chair.
No, you go ahead.
Now, again, my concern is, are we voting on something that's not within our rights to vote on because of the parliamentary language?
So as chair, I'm going to make a decision. Is that okay?
That's all.
So the word urging is kind of one of those words that you can, it's not like you had said, Robert, it's not like we are saying you have to do this. So I'm going to suggest that we vote on the motion as it is presented, if we're all okay with that.
Sure, if you feel the parliamentary language is correct, Chair, I'm fine with that. It's your ruling.
Well, I am new in the role, and I guess if it's not, then I will take the whatever the consequences may be.
Something out of this book?
Yes.
Motions emanating from private members. Private members may introduce motions that do not directly involve the expenditure of public money and have no operative effect, but simply express an abstract opinion on a matter which may necessitate a future grant. These motions merely involve an expression of opinion on the part of the House, and they do not affect the constitutional method of placing upon the government the responsibility of initiating all legislation which has for its object the expenditure of money. Chair, the word urge, to try earnestly or persistently to persuade someone to do something. I don't think there's any reference in there of demanding.
I think the biggest thing here too is that usually how things are put forward from committees is through recommendations. And so this, the wording in this, we just want to make sure that we are. So there just seems to be so much discussion on this. I feel like there might be more to this discussion.
Let's just call it defeated then, if that's the wishes of it.
Well, we wouldn't call it defeated. I certainly wouldn't call it defeated. So would we put in to postpone it? Or add it to the recommendations?
If the committee is fine. If this motion.
With the motion, it wouldn't form our report, and it would just be kind of an opinion from the committee.
It's non-binding.
Yeah, this would just be an expression of the committee. Right?
Yeah.
It won't go anywhere after this.
All right. Okay, so I'm going to propose we vote on it, if that's okay with everyone.
that's good.
Okay. So all those in, should I read it again, or does everyone feel comfortable with?
Go comfortable with what it's.
Okay. So everyone in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Everyone opposed, say nay. Motion carried. Okay, any other new business? Ola, you had said something as well?
Yeah, it actually goes right along these lines. In a sense, I wanted to go back and talk about some of the past representation. It's not the cost of school food, but the election of school boards. I don't know if I want to make a motion, but I want to discuss and at some point discuss before we make the recommendation that we urge the government not to go out and consult the population again, because that has already taken place. A big committee went out and had 4 or 5 consultation meetings, and the answer came back clear. There should be 2 or more school boards. 18-year-olds should be involved, and the representatives should be elected. So, in my opinion, we should urge the government to write the bill and take that out for consultation, not do the same consultation over again. But I'm presenting this not as a motion, just as a point of discussion.
Would that be part of our, like, when we discuss our...
So the Homeless School Federation is coming in to talk about this topic of elected school boards. I don't know.
Yeah, okay. Ola, if it's all right with you, we have the Homeless School Federation coming in on the 28th to talk to us about this, and we could discuss that after we hear from them. Would that be okay with you?
That sounds great. We could even ask them the question and get their input on that as well. Yeah. No, I think that would be great.
Okay. Any other new business? Okay. All right, so I will ask for a motion to adjourn. Heath MacDonald. Shall it carry?
Carried.